Pinocchio. Once upon a time, there was a friendly cricket named Jiminy. One night, Jiminy Cricket travels took him to the workshop of Geppetto, an old wood carver. The workshop was an amazing place. There were ticking clocks, musical boxes, and wonderful wooden toys everywhere. A little boy puppet lay on the bench. Geppetto was putting the finishing touches on him. Now, Geppetto said, I have just a name for you, Pinocchio. Then he added softly, if you were a real boy. That evening at bedtime, Geppetto looked out of the window. Twinkling up in the sky was a wishing star. I wish I might have the wish I make tonight, Geppetto said. He wished for Pinocchio to become a real boy. Soon after, Geppetto and his cat Figaro and Cleo the goldfish were fast asleep. Only Jiminy Cricket was still awake. Suddenly, a bright blue light filled the workshop. The beautiful blue fairy appeared. The fairy looked at Geppetto while he slept. Kind Geppetto, she said gently, you have given so much happiness to others. You deserve to have your wish come true. Waving her wand over Pinocchio, she said, little puppet made of pine, wake. The gift of life is thine. Suddenly, Pinocchio began to stir. I can move, he said in an amazement. I can talk. Prove yourself brave. Truly and unselfish, said the blue fairy, and someday you will be a real boy. Then the fairy turned to Jiminy Cricket. She asked him if he would like to be Pinocchio's conscience. This would mean Jiminy would have to teach the little puppet right from wrong. Jiminy was delighted. Remember, Pinocchio, the fairy said, always let your conscience be your guide. And with that, she disappeared. Just then, Geppetto woke up and saw Pinocchio walking and talking. At first, he thought he must be dreaming, but then he realized his wish had come true. Geppetto was so happy, he began to play a merry tune for everyone to dance. The next morning, a happy Geppetto sent Pinocchio off to school. On the way, two villains, a fox called Honest John and his friend, a cat called Gideon, spotted Pinocchio skipping along. Look, cried Honest John with surprise, a puppet with no strings. We could sell him to Strombo's puppet show and make lots of money. So Honest John and Gideon convinced the little puppet he shouldn't go to school. Becoming an actor would be much more fun. Jiminy tried to stop Pinocchio leaving with the villains, but Pinocchio was too excited to listen. That night, Pinocchio sang and danced merrily in the puppet show. The audience clapped and cheered with delight. Pinocchio was a star. However, when the little puppet asked to go home, Stromboli, the owner of the show, roared with anger. You belong to me now, he bellowed. When he looked when he locked Pinocchio in a cage and let him all alone, frightened. Later that evening, Jiminy Cricket crept into Stromboli's caravan. Jiminy tried to open the lock on Pinocchio's cage, but he couldn't. Pinocchio began to cry. "I should have listened to you, Jiminy," he sobbed. Suddenly, a bright light filled the room, and with a blue fairy appeared. "Pinocchio, why don't you go to school? Why didn't you go to school?" she asked. The little puppet knew he should tell the truth, but he was afraid to. Instead, he said, "Two monsters with green eyes tied me up and put me in a sack." As soon as Pinocchio told this lie, his nose began to grow. The more Pinocchio lied, the longer his nose grew, until eventually there was a bird's nest on the end of it. "Perhaps you haven't been telling the truth," said the blue fairy. "A lie keeps growing and growing until it's as plain as the nose on your face." "I'll never lie again," promised the little puppet. So the blue fairy gently touched Pinocchio's nose and with her wand and turned it back to normal. Then she unlocked the cage and set him free. "I'll race you home, Pinocchio," cried Jiminy, and off they ran. As the little puppet raced after Jiminy, he met up with Honest John and Gideon again. This time they were persuaded Pinocchio that he was ill and needed a holiday at a wonderful place called Pleasure Island. The two villains sold Pinocchio to a wicked coachman who put him on a coach full of very noisy, naughty boys. Luckily, Jimmy managed to climb onto the coach just as he drove away. Pleasure Island was like a giant fun fair. The boys could have anything they wanted and be as naughty as they liked. Jiminy thought there was something strange about Pleasure Island and begged Pinocchio to leave. But the little puppet refused to listen to Jiminy. He wanted to stay and play pool with his new friends, Lampwick. Finally, Jimmy gave up and decided to go home on his own. As Jiminy was leaving, he saw the wicked coachman loading crates of donkeys onto a boat. On the donkeys one of the donkeys was crying and began to go home to his mother. Jiminy was shocked. Somehow all the boys on Pleasure Island were being turned into donkeys. Jiminy raced off to rescue Pinocchio, but by the time Jiminy found his friends, Pinocchio had already grown long, hairy ears and a tail. "Come quick!" cried Jiminy. "Let's get out of here." Jiminy and Pinocchio escaped from the island by jumping into the sea and swimming home. Cold and tired, they finally reached Geppetto's house, but there was no one there. Pinocchio was worried. Maybe something awful has happened to his father. He said, just at that moment, a note floated down from the sky and landed at Pinocchio's feet. It says, "Your father went looking for you and was swallowed by a big whale named Monstro," said Jiminy, "but he's still alive at the bottom of the sea." Pinocchio was determined to find his father, no matter how dangerous it might be. He and Jiminy headed back towards the sea. Pinocchio tied a rock to his donkey's tail to weigh him down, and he and Jiminy dived off a cliff into the water. Down at the bottom of the sea, Pinocchio and Jiminy asked the fish and seahorses for help. But as soon as they had heard Monstro's name, the sea creatures sped off in terror. Meanwhile, not too far away, Monstro was waking up from a long sleep. The whale was so hungry that he gulped down a large shoal of fish. Without realizing, he managed to swallow Pinocchio too. Deep inside the whale's tummy, Geppetto, Figaro, and Cleo sat in their little fishing boat. But when the fish came gushing in, Geppetto began catching them for food. "This one is heavy," Geppetto cried. As he yanked a large fish out of the water, to his surprise, he found Pinocchio clinging into the fish tail. Pinocchio and his father were overjoyed to see each other again. Geppetto was so pleased to see his son that he didn't mind the little puppet's donkey tails and ears. Suddenly, Pinocchio thought of a plan to escape. "We'll build a fire to make lots of smoke," he said. "When the whale sneezes, we'll get blown out through its mouth." Pinocchio's plan worked. As clouds of black smoke filled Monstro's tummy, he gave an enormous sneeze. Geppetto, Pinocchio, Cleo, Figaro, and Jiminy clung to the little raft they had built as they were blown out through the whale's mouth. The whale was furious. They had escaped. He chased after them. "Look out!" shouted Geppetto, but it was too late. As the whale crashed through the water, the little raft toppled over. Everyone was thrown into the sea, and Geppetto couldn't swim. Pinocchio managed to keep his father afloat and dragged him to the shore. Minutes later, Jiminy found Geppetto, Figaro, and Chloe safely on the beach, but there was no sign of Pinocchio. The little puppet was lying face down in the water. He wasn't moving. Heartbroken, Geppetto took his son home. Geppetto knelt over Pinocchio and wept. Suddenly, the blue fairy, dazzling light filled the room once again. "Prove yourself brave, truthful, and unselfish, and someday you'll be a real boy," said the fairy. "You have done all those things. Wake up, Pinocchio." Immediately, a bright light surrounded Pinocchio, and he woke up. There was no longer made of wood. He was a real boy at last. "Father, I'm alive," Pinocchio cried, out of delight. "This calls for a celebration," Geppetto cried joyfully. Jiminy was pleased that everything had ended up happily. But, this was time to move on. "Thank you," he said, looking up at the wishing star. As if, in reply, a shiny gold badge magically appeared on Jimmy's coat. Official conscience, it read. It was a reward from the Blue Fairy. Jiminy gazed over at Pinocchio, playing happily with his father. Now he knew that if you wish upon a star, your dreams really can come true.